Christmas Eve, 1945. In a modest two-story home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, 10 children went to bed with dreams of waking up to presents and celebration. By dawn on Christmas Day, 5 of them had vanished without a trace, their home reduced to smoking rubble, and their parents left to face a nightmare that would consume the rest of their lives. This is not a story about a tragic house fire. This is a story about what happens when nothing makes sense, when the physical evidence contradicts the official explanation, when witnesses report impossibilities, when a grieving family is told to accept answers that don't answer anything. For nearly 80 years, the disappearance of the Sodder children has remained one of America's most perplexing unsolved mysteries, a case where every attempt at explanation only deepens the questions. Welcome to Vanishing Threads. Today we're exploring the Sodder children disappearance, not just as a cold case, but as a decades-long quest for truth that transformed a family's grief into one of the most visible missing persons campaigns in American history. We'll examine the verified facts of that Christmas morning, the disturbing irregularities that fueled speculation, and the extraordinary measures a family took to keep their children's memory alive. This is the story of 5 children who disappeared in flames that may never have consumed them at all. George Sodder was born George Sodder in Tula, Sardinia in 1895. He immigrated to the United States in 1908 at the age of 13, part of the great wave of Italian immigration to America in the early 20th century. Like many immigrants, he anglicized his name upon arrival, becoming George Sodder. He settled in Smithers, West Virginia, finding work in the coal mines that dominated the region's economy. In 1922, George married Jenny Cipriani, herself the daughter of Italian immigrants. Together, they built a life in the coal country of West Virginia, eventually moving to Fayetteville, where George established a successful trucking business. The Sodders were hardworking, devoutly Catholic, and deeply committed to the American dream they had crossed an ocean to pursue. By 1945, the Sodder family had grown to include 10 children: Marion, Sylvia, John, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, and the youngest, Joe. They lived in a 2-story wooden house on the outskirts of Fayetteville, a modest but comfortable home that George had built with his own hands. George was known in the community as an outspoken man, unafraid to voice his opinions. During the Second World War, he had been vocal in his criticism of Benito Mussolini and Italian fascism, a stance that put him at odds with some in the Italian-American community who harbored sympathies for the old country's government. Some would later suggest that these political disagreements may have made George enemies who might harbor grudges. Christmas Eve 1945 was a night of celebration and anticipation for the Sodder children. The family had gathered for their traditional Christmas Eve festivities, the children excited about the presents they would open the following morning. Around 10 p.m., most of the family prepared for bed, though several of the older children asked if they could stay up a bit longer to play with their new toys. George and Jenny agreed, and the couple retired to their bedroom on the first floor around 10:30 p.m., leaving Marion, age 23, and George Jr., age 16, to supervise the younger children. Eventually, everyone settled down for the night. The house grew quiet, lit only by the embers of the fire in the coal stove that provided heating. At approximately 12:30 a.m., Jenny was awakened by a phone call. A woman's voice asked for someone Jenny didn't recognize, and in the background, she could hear clinking glasses and laughter, as if from a party. The woman sounded intoxicated. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. Oddly unsettled by the call, Jenny noticed that the lights were still on downstairs and the front door was unlocked. She went down to check on things, finding Marion and George Jr. asleep. She locked the door, turned off the lights, and returned to bed. About an hour later, around 1:30 a.m., Jenny was awakened again, this time by a loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound, as if something had struck the house and rolled across the roofing. She lay awake, listening, but heard nothing more. Eventually, she drifted back to sleep. At approximately 1:30 a.m., the exact time would later be a source of confusion, Jenny woke to the smell of smoke. George was already awake, shouting. The house was on fire. What happened next unfolded with the surreal, disjointed quality of a nightmare. George and Jenny tried to account for all their children. Marion and George Jr. escaped quickly from the first floor. Sylvia, aged 12, managed to get out with difficulty. John, aged 23, woke in his attic bedroom to find the stairway ablaze, but climbed out of a window and jumped to safety, breaking his arm in the fall. But 5 children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were still inside, in the upstairs bedrooms. George tried desperately to reach them. He rushed to the front porch and tried to re-enter through the front door, but the fire was too intense. He ran around to the side of the house and broke a window, slicing his arm open in the process, but the flames drove him back. George then thought of using a ladder that he normally kept against the side of the house. He ran to fetch it, but the ladder was gone. He looked everywhere he usually kept it. It had vanished. Frantic, George decided he would drive his coal truck up to the house and climb from the truck's bed to the second-floor windows. He ran to where he had parked his 2 trucks. Neither would start, despite having worked perfectly earlier that evening. Neighbors had begun to arrive, drawn by the flames. Someone suggested calling the fire department. George's eldest son, Marion, ran to the Fayetteville operator to call for help. The operator later claimed she never received a call. Another family member drove to the fire chief's house, only 2.5 miles away, and pounded on the door. The fire chief later claimed he never heard anything. The house burned with terrible speed. Within 45 minutes of the fire starting, the entire structure had collapsed into its basement, leaving only smoldering ruins. No fire trucks had arrived, no organized firefighting effort had been attempted, and 5 children had seemingly disappeared into the flames. As the sun rose on Christmas morning 1945, the Sodder family stood in the cold, staring at the smoking remains of their home. 7 family members had escaped: George, Jenny, Marion, John, George Jr., Sylvia, and Joe. 5 had not: Maurice, Martha, Louis, young Jenny, and Betty. A volunteer fire department eventually arrived around 8 a.m., more than 6 hours after the fire started. By then, there was nothing left to save. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, briefly surveyed the ruins and declared that the children's remains had been completely incinerated by the intense heat of the fire. This explanation satisfied local authorities, but it immediately struck the Sodder family as wrong. George, who had worked with coal and combustion for decades, knew how difficult it was to cremate a human body. Modern crematoriums require temperatures of 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained for 2 to 3 hours to reduce an adult body to ashes. A house fire, even a severe one, typically burns at much lower temperatures and in an uneven, uncontrolled manner. Moreover, the fire had consumed the house in less than an hour. The walls of the building, though wooden, had been covered in stone siding that should have provided some fire resistance. Yet the entire structure had collapsed with remarkable speed. George couldn't understand how a fire could burn hot enough and long enough to completely incinerate 5 children, including their bones, teeth, and any other trace of their existence, whilst leaving other household items partially intact. The Sodders asked the fire chief to conduct a thorough search of the ruins. Chief Morris agreed, but his search consisted of little more than walking through the ashes and declaring he found nothing. He did not sift through the debris systematically, did not bring in equipment or experts, and did not treat the site as a potential crime scene requiring forensic examination. Unsatisfied, George hired a private investigator to conduct a more thorough search. This investigator spent several days carefully sifting through the ashes. He found various household items, bits of metal, broken dishes, the remains of appliances, but no human remains whatsoever. No bones, no teeth, no fragments of tissue. The investigator noted this in his report, expressing puzzlement about how 5 children could vanish so completely. Then, 2 years later, in 1947, Chief Morris made a startling admission. According to multiple witnesses, Morris claimed that he had found what appeared to be internal organs during his initial survey of the ruins. He said he had secretly buried them in a box at the site, not telling anyone, because he wanted to spare the family additional grief. He eventually showed George and Jenny where he had supposedly buried these remains. The Sodders had the box exhumed and sent its contents to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis. The Smithsonian's pathologist, Dr. Oscar B. Hunter Jr., examined the materials and determined they were not human remains at all. They were beef liver, fresh and uncooked, that had never been exposed to fire. The pathologist noted that these organs could not possibly have come from the fire. Someone had apparently planted them at the scene, though whether this was done by Chief Morris himself or by someone else remained unclear. This bizarre development convinced the Sodders that something was terribly wrong with the official explanation. They began their own investigation, and what they uncovered only deepened the mystery. In the days and weeks following the fire, the Sodders learned of numerous strange incidents that had occurred before and after that Christmas Eve. Several witnesses came forward with information that had not been included in any official reports. A driver who had passed the Sodder house around 1 a.m. shortly before the fire started reported that he saw 2 or 3 men in a car watching the house. When he drove past again 30 minutes later, the house was in flames. The men and their car were gone. A woman who lived nearby told the Sodders that she had seen the 5 missing children in a passing car on Christmas morning, hours after the fire. She claimed the children appeared frightened and were accompanied by adults she didn't recognize. When asked why she hadn't reported this to police immediately, she said she feared retaliation. A bus driver came forward to say that he had seen a fireball being thrown onto the roof of the Sodder house around 1 a.m. This matched the mysterious thud and rolling sound that Jenny had heard around 12:30 to 1 a.m. Perhaps most disturbingly, several people recalled threatening incidents that had occurred in the months before the fire. A life insurance salesman who had tried to sell George a policy had become angry when George declined. According to witnesses, the salesman had gestured at the Sodder house and said, "Your house is going up in smoke one of these days, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to pay for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." Another man, a local resident, had stopped by the Sodder home in the autumn of 1945 to supposedly inspect their electrical wiring for the power company. He had examined the house and told George that his wiring was faulty and would cause a fire someday. George had immediately hired an electrician to inspect the wiring, and the electrician found nothing wrong. The house's electrical system was in perfect condition. All of these incidents painted a picture that was very different from the official narrative of an accidental house fire. The Sodders became convinced that their house had been deliberately set ablaze and that their 5 children had been kidnapped before or during the fire. George and Jenny hired a private detective, C.C. Tinsley, to investigate further. Tinsley's work uncovered additional troubling details. He found evidence suggesting that the fire department's delay in responding had been deliberate. He interviewed witnesses who claimed that the fire trucks had taken inexplicably long routes to reach the Sodder home. He documented the mysterious disappearance of George's ladder and the simultaneous failure of both his trucks, mechanical failures that seemed statistically improbable to occur at precisely the same moment. Tinsley also investigated the beef liver incident and concluded that Chief Morris had likely been involved in a cover-up, though whether Morris was part of the original crime or simply trying to close the case remained unclear. Armed with this information, the Sodders pleaded with local authorities to reopen the investigation. They were met with resistance at every turn. The fire was ruled accidental. The case was closed. Officials showed no interest in the evidence the family had gathered or the witnesses who had come forward. In 1949, frustrated by official inaction, the Sodders took their case to the public in a dramatic way. They erected a large billboard along State Route 16 near Fayetteville. The billboard displayed large photographs of the 5 missing children and offered a $5,000 reward for any information leading to their discovery. The reward would eventually increase to $10,000, a substantial sum at the time. The billboard's message was unequivocal. 5 children are missing. $5,000 reward for information. Below the children's photographs, the sign included details about the fire and how to contact the family. The billboard became a landmark along the highway, impossible to ignore, a constant reminder to everyone passing through Fayetteville that the Sodder family had not given up. The billboard generated hundreds of tips over the years. Some were obviously fraudulent, attempts to claim the reward money with false information. Others seemed more promising. The Sodders investigated every lead, traveling across the country whenever someone claimed to have seen the children. A woman from Charleston, West Virginia, wrote to say that while dining at a restaurant, she had noticed a group resembling the missing children with several adults. When she approached to get a closer look, the group quickly paid their bill and left. Another woman wrote from St. Louis, Missouri, claiming that she had seen Martha, the 12-year-old, working as a waitress. George and Jenny immediately traveled to St. Louis, but by the time they arrived, the woman had disappeared, and no one at the restaurant knew anything about her. In the mid-1950s, a traveling salesman told the Sodders that while passing through a small town in Kentucky, he had stayed at a motel where he saw 4 of the missing children, now young adults, working as staff. The Sodders rushed to Kentucky and spent weeks investigating, but they never found any evidence to support the salesman's claim. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. The envelope contained a photograph of a young man in his 20s and a cryptic message on the back: Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie, Illil Boys, A90132 or 35. There was no return address. The photograph showed a young man with Mediterranean features, and Jenny became convinced it was her son Louis, who would have been 32 years old at the time. The family had the photograph analyzed by experts, and whilst some believed there were similarities between the man in the photo and childhood pictures of Louis, others were skeptical. The message on the back of the photograph only deepened the mystery. I love Brother Frankie made little sense. There was no one named Frankie in the Sodder family. Illil Boys meant nothing to anyone. The numbers A90132 appeared to be some form of code or reference number, but no one could determine what they meant. The Sodders had the photograph professionally enhanced and included it on a new version of their billboard. The updated sign now showed the age-progressed photograph alongside the original childhood pictures, with text explicitly stating that the children had been kidnapped and questioning why authorities had failed to properly investigate. George Sodder died in 1969, 24 years after the fire, never knowing what happened to his children. Jenny continued the search alone, maintaining the billboard and investigating tips until her death in 1989. To the end of their lives, both George and Jenny Sodder adamantly refused to believe their children had died in the fire. They were convinced the children had been kidnapped and were alive somewhere, possibly raised by other families, possibly held against their will. The Sodder children case has been re-examined numerous times over the decades, with modern investigators and forensic experts offering new perspectives on the old evidence. In 2013, the Smithsonian Magazine published a comprehensive investigation of the case, interviewing surviving family members and reviewing all available documentation. The article highlighted the numerous irregularities that made the accidental fire explanation difficult to accept, whilst also noting that concrete evidence of kidnapping remained elusive. Modern fire investigators who have reviewed the case note several anomalies. The speed at which the house burned, completely collapsing in under an hour, is unusual for a wooden structure of that size. The complete absence of any human remains, despite the relatively moderate temperature of a house fire compared to a crematorium, defies explanation. The simultaneous failure of multiple systems, the missing ladder, 2 trucks that wouldn't start, delayed fire department response, suggests either extraordinary coincidence or deliberate sabotage. However, skeptics point out that memories of traumatic events are notoriously unreliable, and that much of the evidence consists of witness statements collected days, weeks, or even years after the fire. The photograph received in 1968 has never been definitively proven to be Louis Sodder, and the message on its back could be a hoax designed to prey on the family's grief. The FBI reviewed the case in the 1960s at the Sodders' request, but found insufficient evidence to launch a federal investigation. They noted that whilst the circumstances were suspicious, there was no concrete proof of kidnapping or any federal crime. In recent years, genealogical DNA testing has offered new hope for resolving decades-old cold cases. However, the Sodder case presents unique challenges. With no confirmed remains to test, and most of the surviving Sodder family members now deceased, establishing genetic matches would be difficult even if any of the missing children were found alive today. All 5 children would be in their 80s or 90s if still living. The Sodder children disappearance raises profound questions about how investigations were conducted in mid-20th century America, particularly in small, rural communities. The case reveals a troubling pattern of inadequate police work, missing evidence, delayed responses, and official indifference to a family's desperate search for answers. Modern forensic standards would have required a thorough investigation of the fire scene, including systematic sifting of all debris, documentation of the fire's origin and spread pattern, and preservation of any potential evidence. None of this occurred in 1945, the fire chief's cursory walkthrough of the ruins and his extraordinary claim about secretly burying organs. Organs that turned out to be uncooked beef liver, suggest either shocking incompetence or something more sinister. The pre-fire threats against George Sodder, particularly the insurance salesman's statement about the house going up in smoke and the children being destroyed, take on ominous significance in hindsight. If these threats were taken seriously at the time, they received no documented police attention. The case also illustrates the power of persistent advocacy. For 40 years, the Sodder billboard stood along State Route 16, a testament to a family's refusal to accept an explanation they believed to be false. In an era before social media, before internet campaigns and viral missing persons cases, the Sodders used the tools available to them: a billboard, flyers, reward offers, and personal investigation to keep their children's story alive. The billboard was taken down in 1989, shortly after Jenny Sodder's death. For decades afterward, the site remained empty, the posts that had held the sign still visible as markers of the family's decades-long vigil. The billboard itself is preserved by the surviving Sodder family members and has been featured in documentaries and museum exhibits about American cold cases. Several of the surviving Sodder children, particularly Sylvia Sodder Paxton, continued their parents' investigation well into the 21st century. Sylvia maintained that she heard noises consistent with someone moving around upstairs during the fire. Not the screams or cries for help one would expect from trapped children, but quiet sounds, as if someone was moving deliberately. This recollection has fueled theories that the children may have been removed from the house before the fire fully took hold. The case has been featured in numerous television documentaries, podcasts, and true crime series, including Unsolved Mysteries, which aired a segment on the disappearance in 1989. Each retelling has generated new tips, though none have led to definitive answers. One intriguing modern theory suggests that the kidnapping, if it occurred, may have been related to Italian-American organized crime or political intrigue. George Sodder's vocal opposition to Mussolini during the war years, combined with his success as a businessman in a close-knit Italian-American community, may have made him a target for extremists or criminals. Some researchers have suggested that the children could have been taken to Italy or given to families with connections to Italian organized crime, though no evidence has emerged to support this hypothesis. Another theory focuses on the possibility of an organized child trafficking network operating in the region during the 1940s. This theory proposes that the children were abducted for sale to childless families or for more sinister purposes. However, there is no documented evidence of such a network operating in West Virginia during this period. The most prosaic explanation remains that the fire was indeed accidental, and that the children's remains were completely consumed in the blaze, despite the seeming impossibility of this outcome. Proponents of this theory argue that unusual fire conditions, perhaps accelerated by the house's coal stove, stored fuel or other combustibles, could have created temperatures hot enough to cremate the bodies. They attribute the missing ladder and truck failures to panic and confusion during the emergency, and dismiss the witness accounts of suspicious activity as unreliable memories influenced by the family's subsequent investigation. Yet this explanation requires accepting a remarkable series of coincidences: the mysterious pre-fire threats, the strange phone call and roof disturbance shortly before the fire, the simultaneous failure of multiple systems, the delayed emergency response, the complete absence of remains, the planted beef liver, and the numerous reported sightings of the children afterward. Each incident might be dismissed individually, but collectively they create a pattern that is difficult to ignore. Today, nearly 80 years after that Christmas Eve in 1945, the fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sodder remains unknown. They would be 94, 92, 88, 87, and 85 years old respectively, if still alive. The likelihood of resolving the case diminishes with each passing year as witnesses die, memories fade, and physical evidence degrades. The site where the Sodder home once stood is now an empty lot, overgrown with grass and trees. A small memorial marker stands where the house's foundation used to be, a quiet testament to the 5 children who vanished on Christmas morning. Visitors still occasionally leave flowers or toys at the site, particularly around Christmas. The broader mystery of what happened on that December night has become part of West Virginia folklore, a cautionary tale told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing mysteries are the ones closest to home. The case has inspired novels, television episodes, and countless online discussions. True crime enthusiasts continue to debate the evidence, propose theories, and search for new leads. For the surviving members of the Sodder family, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of George and Jenny, the mystery remains personal and painful. They have inherited not just a family history, but an unanswered question that has defined their family's identity for 3 generations. Some believe their aunts and uncles died in the fire despite the lack of remains. Others maintain that the children were kidnapped and possibly survived into adulthood, never knowing their true identity or that a family spent decades searching for them. The case stands as a testament to the limits of investigation, the persistence of grief, and the power of questions that refuse to be answered. Whether the Sodder children died in that fire or were carried away into unknown lives, their story reminds us that sometimes the truth remains forever out of reach, preserved only in the memories of those who refused to stop searching and the photographs on a billboard that stood for 40 years along a West Virginia highway. What do you think happened to the Sodder children? Was this a tragic accident made worse by inadequate investigation, or evidence of something far more sinister, a kidnapping that was covered up or simply never properly investigated? The physical evidence seems to contradict the official explanation, yet no concrete proof of an alternative theory has ever emerged. Perhaps that's what makes this case endure, the uncomfortable space between fact and uncertainty. 80 years later, the fire has long been extinguished, the billboard has faded, and the small town of Fayetteville has changed. But one question still lingers in the cold mountain air. What really happened to the Sodder children? Thanks for tuning in, and remember, stay curious, stay safe.